Today's guest, Kurt Nelson, behavioral scientist and host of the podcast Behavioral Grooves. All right, everybody, let's talk motivation and change. Today on The Open Highway.
Hello, great minds! Mr. DGMH here, but wait, what the hell is DGMH? DGMH, or Drinks with Great Minds in History, is a weekly podcast that covers one of history's greatest minds each month, while we enjoy, review, and rate themed cocktails, liquors, and beers on the scale of greatness. As greats like Alexander Hamilton square off against George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and more, DGMH is the perfect cocktail of history, sarcasm, and alcohol, with a twist of psych and a bunch of shots along the way. So grab yourself a drink with some great minds in history. Cheers!
I have to ask right off the bat, though, it's like behavioral science seems like such a deep topic. It seems like, it's so very collegiate, but it's not. It's a pretty basic idea when it comes down to it, right?
So I think of behavioral science as like you're studying why people do what they do, why they behave in the way that they behave, which I think we do naturally. This is something that you do it from when you're a baby, right? I mean, you watch others, you see how they behave, you make inferences about that and about your reaction and what you do and how that causes other people to behave. So it's one of the most natural things, I think, in the world when you think about it.
How'd you get into that? How do you get into behavioral science? You wake up, you're 6 years old, you look in the mirror and you're like, why am I doing what I'm doing?
No, actually, that's interesting. When I was a kid, though, I did want to be a scientist. I mean, I had the little chemistry set and the little vials and the little, things that I got for Christmas one year, and kind of mix things up and make them smoke or whatever. And that's what I had always envisioned as a scientist. I had envisioned it in the white coat and kind of in a lab, kind of doing that stuff. And that just seemed cool to me. And then as I obviously got older and went to high school and other things, it was, no, I got to get into business or whatever else it is to make money, right? Because you're not going to do that. And I'm not smart enough to be the chemist or the biophysicist or whatever that would be. In reality, I was always very interested in psychology, like social psychology in particular. This, like, why people, what drives us? What are some of those underlying motives? But I went in, got a college degree in marketing and economics, then went to work for a little bit, went back, got my master's, went to work for again. And during that work, basically kind of realized that the work that I was doing was really trying to understand what motivates people. And it was all around engaging and motivating people. And I just kind of took it off from there. I started a company that was kind of focused in on that, not specifically, then ended up going back and getting a PhD in IO psychology. And so that's a really short and truncated version of
and now here you are.
Long, boring, long, boring story otherwise.
So which part of motivation motivates you? Which aspect of it really gets you going?
So this is the interesting thing, and this is the thing that I talk to with people when we talk about motivation, is that we'd like to be able to break it down and to say that, hey, this is the one thing that really motivates people, or the one thing that motivates at least me in understanding that. And the fact of the matter is, as much of any type of work that we do in behavioral science or any of the research that we do, is that there's a myriad of different things, and it's contextually based. It is based upon how I woke up. Did I sleep well last night? Did I not
Mm.
sleep well last night? Did I wake up and my kids were in a good mood, or my kids were oversleeping and I had to go get them to get to school. So depending upon where you are in your journey of life overall, where you are in your everyday contextual pieces, there are a lot of different things that motivate people. Now I say that with this caveat, right? That in general, people have, they have motivational profiles. So there are things that will motivate me more than they will motivate you. And everybody has an idiosyncratic, this kind of individualized motivational profile. That motivational profile, though, unlike a personality profile, isn't consistent. It doesn't necessarily stay exactly the same over years. It moves relatively quickly. But in general, I know that for me, I get motivated by, learning. I get motivated by, having really interesting conversations. I get motivated in reality. There's a lot of things about having, um, people recognize the stuff that I do. So it's not just about doing good work, but I want to be recognized for that. And I want to make sure that comes out. It sounds kind of crazy, but that's part of what motivates me. So
No, that makes sense, because then you're feeding the cycle. It's like a negative and a positive. You can have a positive cycle where you're going to get something in your life that you're going to go, oh, wow, I see the result of that, or I see what people were responding to it, whether it's going to the gym, losing weight.
yeah.
As soon as somebody else notices, like, oh, yeah, you're looking good, then you want to go back to the gym. But it's the same with the negative, right? It's like if somebody's pointing out negative things, you can dwell on that and go into a negative cycle.
Oh yeah. I mean, all the time people, and that's the psychology that I studied is not the psychology of getting people on a couch and kind of looking back and trying to understand what's wrong with their life. It's looking at what drives the positive parts of their life. But that negative rumination around things is a horrible piece that for many people can be really debilitating. And even for people who are doing really well in life, I mean, that's the stuff that keeps us up. We wake up in the middle of the night, and why can't we get back to sleep? It's not because we're all full of energy necessarily. It's because what's going on in our heads. It's that, oh wow, they didn't reply the way I thought they would in that email, and are they meaning more? Am I, and you start worrying about things, and having
Yeah.
that there's a powerful motivation to kind of get rid of that angst, right?
Yeah.
There's a powerful motivation to do that. And so some people can tap into that, and that can be a really powerful driver. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that as a good way of doing it, because you're living your life in a whole bunch of stress and crazy other factors that probably aren't overall that good for
Yeah.
you. So
There's something about that. I'm always fascinated by projection.
mm,
Projection fascinates me because I do that, and as I get older, I've had time to be able to start picking my life together. But then you start looking at the other end of it, and you're like, oh crap, I've only got so many years to fix stuff before I'm done. But projection is something, and like you said, it's like you're projecting your motivation, your lack of motivation on somebody else, or somebody says something and it's your own insecurities. You're like, oh well, they must mean this,
yeah,
they must be saying this about it, and they're not. They just made a passing comment, or they did
yeah.
something.
There's a fascinating behavior science concept called the fundamental attribution error, right? Which is this concept that basically states that when we look at our lives and kind of go, oh, I had that report due and I can't get it done on Friday. I'll get it to you on Monday. And when you think about the reasons why, it's often, not always, it's often about external factors. Oh, this happened, that happened. It wasn't my fault,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet, if we were expecting to get that report in on Friday and somebody else came to us, what we do is we go, oh, they didn't get it done because they're lazy, or they're just incompetent in that area.
Yeah.
And so we often attribute kind of these intentions to other people when we don't necessarily do the same thing to ourselves. And now you talked about motivation, and that's a whole nother thing. What we also do is this fact of saying, I'm motivated by X, and therefore everybody else should be motivated by X. And we do that, which is a perfectly common thing to do because we live within our own brain. We live within our own world. And so it's hard. It's really hard. As much as we like to think that we have empathy with other people and can, oh, I'll just, walk a mile in their shoes. Really hard to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, figuratively in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, we do a lot of work with organizations on working with incentives and motivational programs and different pieces. And one of the biggest issues, actually, just talking to a client the other day who's like, so how do we explain this to the executives who think they know, what motivates people? And I go, it's one of the biggest issues that we have, because you talk to a senior sales executive and they're saying, well, when I was doing that job, this is what motivated me. And so that's what's going to motivate everybody else. And you're going, that's great. And it probably motivates a subgroup of people, but that's a subgroup of people.
Right. It's like a teacher saying that every student learns the same way.
Yeah. And they don't. And people aren't motivated the same way. And people, again, even within a week, you're going to be talking to one person who has a great night's sleep, just, is feeling great that day. And that motivation is going to be what gets them up and going, is going to be different than somebody who got a crappy amount of sleep, had a fight with their significant other in the morning. And now you're trying to motivate them. You better not go in with the same approach, because it's going to be very different.
So what about, so you mentioned more current kind of physical things. You didn't get enough sleep. You had a fight with your spouse, there's the whole idea of leave it at the door, like your boss. That's a great example you said about your boss. They're like, you're on the clock. I don't care what happened the other, 12 hours of the day. You're on my clock, and I have a t-shirt that we sell through Viking Dog that says, nobody cares about Clark Kent's problems.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants Superman. They don't care that Clark Kent's got to pay the rent. They don't care that he's got bills to pay. They just want Superman to save the cat out of the tree.
Yeah.
So we have those, but what about more hardwired stuff, like the buttons that have been installed when you were a kid, or some of the longer term stuff, short of going to a psychotherapist and lying on the couch for a couple of years? Like, how do you dig in and start to rewire some of that stuff in order to be motivated?
That is a fascinating question, because there is so much of who we are that is predicated by the experiences that we've gone through and how we then interpreted those experiences, whether it be from when we're really young to even, last year or 2 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever that would be. And I think what you're trying to say is, how do you unpack that? How do you understand what it is? Because it goes into our mindset. It goes into, there's a lot of research out there that talks about mindsets. Do you have a growth mindset? In other words, are you a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Carol Dweck has done a lot of work on that and really some cool stuff. Basically saying, look, some people show up in the world, and if they get a negative, they get this proposal, needs to have this and this and this because it's not up to par, then they take that and go, great, I now know what I need to do next time. Versus a fixed mindset, so it will take that and it just, then they say, oh my God, that's the worst for me because I've just failed. And impose, instead of thinking about failing, if you thought about that as an opportunity to learn, that's different. That gets in how your mindset, and that is often given by, like, when you were young, how you were you rewarded for just the A's that you got, and did that come easy versus did you have to struggle and work and realize that if I work harder, then I can do better? All sorts of different factors in there. The piece that you asked about is how do you go in and, outside of getting on a therapist's couch, kind of unpack some of that. And I think it's really hard. But I do think there are things where, if the biggest thing, I'm making this generalization, this is just me and my personal thoughts on this, but I think one of the biggest things is that we don't often take a really hard look at ourselves and trying to understand. And that's natural, right? We're busy people. Life goes on, and how much time do you actually have to spend to really do some introspection, to really take 10 minutes, 30 minutes a day of just sitting there and trying to go, well, when I was young, what was I doing? And oftentimes we often try to do that solitarily too. In other words, we just think about it or write it and journal it. And oftentimes people process things through conversations. And so I think there's some value in doing that reflective work and doing that journaling or doing that thinking. But then if you know people from your past and, your siblings, whoever it would be, there's some real value in being able to go back and saying, let's sit down and have conversation. Remember when we were kids, was I always this way, or what did you see? Because
Yeah.
that outside perspective is often things that our brains keep from ourselves. We don't, as I mentioned before, that fundamental attribution error, there's a whole bunch of behavioral biases that really are about protecting our self-image, that we don't like it when we always want to have a positive self-image of ourselves.
So isn't
And
that,
go ahead.
let me put that for a second. So we have the whole idea of victimization in the world, and there's people who fall all across the spectrum on that. There's some people that are like, no, that's a legitimate. There are situations where it's a legitimate issue. If something happens to somebody, then absolutely, it's going to change the way you look at the world, the way you look at yourself. And then there's other people who use it as an excuse. They're like, oh, well, this happened to me when I was 6. And it's like, okay, your dad left you at the ballpark for a couple hours after dark. I don't think that changes your entire life. If something tragic happened to you, that's a different story. So what you're saying, when you go back and you talk to your siblings or you talk to people from your past, I mean, that's taking ownership of your life. And that really allows you to then make the changes that you want to make, versus just being that ship that just gets rocked along and suddenly you're in your 60s and your 70s and you're like, oh, what did I do?
Crap, what happened? Yeah, where did life go? You bring up a really good point. It's that ownership. And I talked a little bit before about the interpretation of events in our lives, right? And so there's this fantastic little analogy that actually I didn't come up with, and I'm forgetting the name of the person who talked about it, but it's basically this idea of 3 people and all of a sudden there's a snake, right? And one person just screams and just runs out of the room because it's a snake. The other person gets down and is like looking at it and going, is that a a copper snake, or is it, whatever, I don't know snakes, right? Whatever kind of snake that is. And the other guy is like kicking out his knife and he's like, on dinner, here we go, and it's the snake is the snake. The snake is this thing that's there. It's the objective reality that's in the room. But the way that people interpret it are dependent upon kind of what their experiences. That first person, deathly afraid of skates, maybe had an experience when they were 6 with a snake and it scared them, and so now forever they're scared. The other one like is fascinated with snakes and wants to learn about them, and the third one is like, oh, that's a great meal. We used to eat snake for Sunday dinner.
I know all 3 of these people.
And so the thing is that snake isn't any different. What is different is how we interpret that snake. And the fact of the matter is every one of those people has within them the power to change how they interpret seeing that snake. So, and rightfully or wrongfully, you can go backwards. You could go to that being scared of the snake and running away from it in some situations, or you could hopefully move forward, whether you think forward is the food on the table or examining what that snake is, whatever that would be. But you can choose to kind of overcome and understand what it is that's going there. That's going back to what we talked about, like talking with your siblings, like you said, taking ownership over that. Okay, what happened to me? I'm scared of snakes because I got, my older sibling threw a snake at me out in the playground one time and I got scared about it. Well, but I know that 98% of all snakes are harmless, or whatever the actual reality is, and I can go and try to overcome that, and I can grow from that. I don't have to be limited by that initial component of it. And if you take that mindset going into things, that's how you grow. That's how you get beyond some of these things and hopefully become a better person.
So how do you get that growth? Like you had mentioned journaling, which is something I do a little bit. I tried like the free form journaling where you
Yeah.
just sit down and you just like whatever comes to mind. And the problem is I'm a writer, so it suddenly becomes like this whacked out. It starts out talking about my childhood, and suddenly I'm talking about aliens from this space battle or something. But what seems to work better for me is more of almost like a flow chart, or like I have ways where it's just thoughts, but I like branch them off, but that's my
Mhm.
style and that's what
Yeah.
works for me. But what are some of the ways that people can go about that? And then isn't it important then to craft it to their own way of looking at the world? Because it seems too often, and whenever I teach, and I don't teach, not this, but like I teach whenever I have taught and I work with, whether it's writing or theater or acting or filmmaking or journalism or whatever I've taught people. One of the things that I always tell them, it doesn't matter what the subject is, but if somebody says this is the only way to do it,
Mm.
walk away. Because like anybody who's telling you that there's only one way to conquer an issue, unless it's like, a scientific fact or something, gravity, there's only this.
Yeah, but
It's always about a toolbox.
there's yeah.
The earth is flat. I don't know if you heard that show, but
We had Lee on our show as well. So yeah,
did you?
oh
He's a
my
trip,
God,
man.
he's amazing. Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
if you can get Andy Norman on your show, Andy's really great too.
We got Andy as
Andy,
well. So there.
did
Yeah.
you? Andy,
Yeah.
what a small world.
It is. It's crazy. And I'm sure we can approach this at two very different ways, which goes back to this very point of, you know what, there isn't one way of accomplishing, again, to your point, 99.9% of most things in this world. There are better ways and worse ways, but there isn't one way. And that doesn't.
But what are some ways?
Yeah, so some ways of kind of looking. So journaling is one that people have talked about, and the research shows that if you can do it, it's good. For some people, journaling is horrid. It's a painful exercise, and why would I want to do that? And part of this too is going back to this idea that we didn't talk about this, so it's not going back to this idea. It's bringing up this idea of consistency. The idea that, all right, I'm going to solve all of my problems, or I'm going to become a much better person by just doing this, 1 hour kind of deep reflection of my life. You know what? That is most likely not going to work. Again, I won't say never, but for the most part, that won't work. There's an element of having consistency in our way that we do things and the way that we are approaching aspects, because we tend to fall back into what's called the status quo bias, that we fall back into our easily recognizable patterns, those habits of both behavior as well as thinking that we do, that if we can consistently break through those, then we can make some significant change. Again, you talked about like going to the gym and working out, right? Those people who, it'll come up, the gym membership is going to blossom here over it in January, always does. And the gyms get filled up for the first 3 weeks of January, and then by March, April, they're empty again, right? Because we start off with really high motivation to do that, and then over the course of the period it wanes. And so I think there's a couple of things. One is about how do you understand yourself, and so going back and kind of finding those reflection points. And so to your point, you need to experiment and find different things that is going to work for you. If it's a flow chart, if it's having conversations, if it is journaling, if it's taking a long walk along the beach on a regular basis that will allow you to have those moments of clarity or reflection, that you can be thinking about your life and what's important about it. That's great. But then it comes down to, okay, so what are you going to do about it? And that gets to the point that I think you were talking about earlier too, is this piece of, okay, you got to take ownership, but ownership of that doesn't matter if it doesn't change how I then go out and look at the world, or am motivated to do what I want to do, or I have certain goals I want to achieve, and I keep kind of coming up short because of these so-called, things that are holding me back.
And there, I think you hit on something there too, is you mentioned the clarity.
Yeah.
And I think I've come to realize that clarity is so important all across my life. But if you're wanting to change something, if you're wanting to change your motivation or fix where you're coming from, if you don't know where you want to go,
No.
you can't head that way, right? I mean, you have to have that clarity, whether it's like, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to fix my relationship, or I want to just get out of bed and be happy in the morning.
Yeah.
You at least have to know what that clarity is or where you're going, right?
Well, and this is an interesting piece, because if you can get that clarity, it's so much better. But I think sometimes people get stuck in, I have to have this clear, the absolute clear picture of things going. And you might be better served, because we know this from behavioral science too, is this, it's the fake it till you make it kind of thing. If you have a general idea that, all right, I want to get healthier. Okay. I don't know if that means eating better, exercising regularly, 20 pounds off, whatever that would be. All right. Well, I at least start doing something. And and the thing that this is, if people are listening and want to take something out of this conversation, is start small, but start small with something that you will be able to consistently do. So, for instance, we talk about habits and routines and different things. And there's some researchers, BJ Fogg talks about tiny habits, and other people, James Clear talks about atomic habits. I mean, getting even smaller, these really small things that you can do. And you think about it and it seems really trivial, right? BJ Fogg talks about, well, if you're going to start trying flossing, just make a routine to floss one tooth, you know, and you're going to go, well, what's that going to do? Well, but if you do one tooth regularly, usually what happens is you floss one, and you've gone through, you got the floss out, you wrapped it around your fingers, opened up your mouth, got it in. All right, I'll do that one, but I'm in there, I might as well do two. And then you just end up, flossing your entire mouth. And if you just start small, what usually happens is that then you build up that routine, and then you can add to that routine, and then you can build off of that. But if you start like, I'm going to go work out 8 times, a week at the gym, twice on Sunday and every other day once, right? Because I'm going to get in shape. You're gonna just burn out, and that motivation to do it isn't going to be there.
But
And
that works for
so,
some mentalities, though. It does. I mean, there are people like and anybody listening to the show knows this. So I lost a lot of weight, and I over a short amount of time. And part of the reason I was able to do it was because I was in the gym 6 days a week. I was going twice a day, and I went from 250 to 180, and 250 to 200 in 3 months.
oh wow.
And then, but it was because I had the ability, and because of where I was working and everything that was going on, I had the ability to go to the gym twice a day. So it was like going into a hardcore regiment, but I was lucky.
But the regiment. So talk to me. So, because I think this is probably a key piece of this. So, did you do it at the same time every day? How did you? Did you build it into your life?
Well, part of it was the catalyst. And I think catalysts are always important whenever. So 2 things happened to me. I've never told this part of it on the show, so now you're getting it out of me. 2 things happened. I was doing a movie, and I was doing what's called ADR, and that's when you go in and they put it up on the screen and you fix the dialogue. Because you have to do the additional dialogue recording. And I looked at myself and I went, oh my God, I am freaking fat. And I remember looking at myself, and I was playing this like Dog the Bounty Hunter character, and I was, really soft looking. I was like, God, if I lost weight, I could start doing more action roles, and when I was acting and doing everything. So I was contemplating that. And then the exact same time, my best friend from college, met him the first day of college. He ended up moved out to Virginia, worked for the CIA. He was at his daughter's soccer game, and he dropped dead of a heart attack on the sidelines in front of his daughter. And that shook me. And then I went to the funeral, and I remember standing there with all of my friends. And there's this photo that I have that it scares me every time I look at it. And I look at all of us, I'm like, we are all in our 40s. We are all fluffy. for lack of a better
Mhm.
term. And I'm like, we are all going to die if something doesn't change. And I came back and I was done. I was just done. So that went into every morning. I'd get up at 6 o'clock, I'd go to the gym, and then I would go again in the afternoon. And that was the catalyst that created it. And it was able to push me through, as well as having this situation that I was able to do it. And not everybody could do that.
It-
But yeah, so there's
it-
your answer. There's my therapist
well,
here.
but you bring up a couple really interesting pieces here, and this I think is really interesting. So maybe we can dig into this because
Do it.
you talk about this catalyst, and it's a pretty significant catalyst, and because what you were doing or thinking about is a couple different pieces here. And again, I'm not the person to put you down on a couch and dissect this, but it's that self-image, and you had this juxtaposition about where we all have an image of ourselves. And so for people that, I don't know if you show this in the video or not, but I'm bald, right? I've been bald for many, many, many years. And yet in my dreams, sometimes I still have really long hair, and I'm, wiping it out of my eyes. And this
Fabio.
idea, yeah, Fabio kind of thing, right? It's like, oh man, gotta see. And that's not how I look. It's not who I am, but yet that's part of this background self-image of me. And when you face, there's and again, I'm bringing up all these psychological terms, but there's this aspect called cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger from the 1940s and 50s was talking about it, which is this idea that when we have a belief, and that belief is kind of strongly held, and then it gets challenged, there are a couple different ways. And oftentimes you go, oh, well, if there's facts against that belief, then I should change my belief to fit the facts. But that's not always what happens.
Mhm.
What often happens is that we rationalize things away. We ignore the facts. We do whatever it is to ignore whatever those things are, so we don't have that that sense of this like thing in your gut that you feel when it's like, oh, that doesn't seem right,
Mhm.
And that is a strong piece when all of a sudden you break through that cognitive dissonance where you can no longer just ignore that, and you see that picture of you're up there on the screen and you're going, oh my god, I'm fluffy. Or you see that picture of everybody at the funeral. And I've had similar things. Like I lost 20 pounds, not to the degree that you did, but because I saw a picture of me and my golf buddies, and I always thought that some of them were fluffy, right? And I'm looking at them and going, oh, those are the fluffy ones, and I'm in this other group. And then I looked at one and I didn't recognize myself. It's like, oh, I'm one of the bigger guys. And it was like, oh crap, I misrecognized myself. And so those moments, there are certain times where you get that catalyst, that motivation that is so powerful that it is the thing that can drive you through.
Mhm.
Now, if you were going in and saying, again, we'll go back to the flossing your teeth. If you went into a dentist and they said, you're losing your teeth, and you will, within a year, you will have lost 8 teeth if you don't start doing this, that might be a catalyst to do it. Most times people don't have those big catalysts to do a lot of the changes that we want in our life.
Yeah.
And so that's where the smaller piece comes in. But if you can get a catalyst and you can have something that is really powerful there, that can be a very good way to motivate. But then I think the second piece that you said is you started to set up a routine. You started to set up this process for what you did. And so you did it every morning. You went to the gym, you did that thing at evening, and you did that. And then you probably set some goals for yourself. And so you probably saw progress pretty quickly. One of the things that we know from motivation is that the progress is a really key piece of that. If we see ourselves progressing, that's a strong motivator for us. As soon as we start to plateau out or even go reverse, that becomes a really demotivator for us. And so there are a number of factors that come into all of this. But yes, you are absolutely right. There are moments and times where going big and strong and fast can be really powerful.
Yeah. And then we talked about it a little bit earlier, and you just mentioned it now, is the reward. Once you start seeing the reward or the progress, then you're able to latch into that, and that pushes you forward. And it's funny because we're recording this before New Year's, but it's going to drop after New Year's. So as people are
Mhm.
listening to this, they are going to the gym. Maybe
Yeah.
there's some people on the treadmill right now going, "Oh God, you're telling me what I'm gonna do, and freaking I'm quitting $29 a month to sweat." um, but it's finding that level that's going to keep pushing you forward. So what do you look for to keep you going until that reward really kicks in? You have to find ways to you don't get, we're such a society that's in, whether it's our phone or it's the dopamine hit or
Yeah.
whatever it is, we want it now. We
Yep.
want it. We want quick rewards. We want quick loss, quick weight loss. We
Yeah.
want instant everything. So how do you do that?
So one is looking at how are you structuring what it is that you're trying to achieve, and can you set up milestones so that, all right, if you had a goal of losing X amount of pounds or getting into whatever shape, and so what are those little shorter milestones? There's a whole bunch of work on goal setting and goal theory, this idea. So, and you've probably gone through this, right? You're really excited when you start
Mhm.
something, and then the motivation usually dips in the middle, but the closer you get to that end zone, that goal, then your motivation goes back up, right? And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
the shorter that you can make those pieces, then the less that dip is, and the closer that you get, and you can kind of do some different pieces there.
Yeah.
The other thing is, how do you set things up? Katie Milkman is a fantastic researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, and she um, talks about, she coined this thing, and now I just drew a blank on what is called, temptation bundling. So this idea, she talked about going to the gym, and she hated going to the gym, but she really loved, I think it was like reading the Harry Potter books. And so what she did is she goes, all right, I'm putting my Harry Potter book, in my locker at the gym, at that book on tape, whatever it was. And I only get to listen to Harry Potter when I go to the gym. And
Okay.
so it's temptation. You're bundling this temptation, this thing that I really love, with this thing that I really know I need to do, but I don't necessarily enjoy. And so if you
Yeah.
can tie those two together, that's your reward right away. It before you start seeing that weight loss, before you start seeing the facet of getting into shape better and to building up the muscle or whatever it is that you're doing, you're giving yourself those little rewards along the way.
But that can be
And
dangerous because some people's temptation bundling or their reward is, well, I'm going to go do 30 minutes of cardio and then go have a chocolate whipped latte frappuccino. I don't drink them, so I don't even know what they're called,
but
and that's a reward. It's like, well, okay, well, that no. It's
so that's
work.
just, you have to definitely think about what it is that you're, if, yeah, to the point of like, I'm going to go exercise for 30 minutes and then I'm going to go have a huge ice cream sundae every time. Well, if your goal is to lose weight, you're not going to do that, right? That's contrary. That reward and your objective are contrary. So you need to have things that, listening to an audiobook or watching a television show while you're doing something is not going to be a negative aspect on your, the ultimate goal that you're trying to do with the thing that isn't as temptation
It,
driving the things. Yeah.
yeah, and it sounds like the Harry Potter one I find interesting, just because then it's like special time. It's like you're
Yeah.
creating this special event, and it takes away, whether it's going to the gym or some other activity, even going for a walk. That's becomes a very, I'm going to use this term, but I don't want to, but I'm going to say it's a sacred kind of
Yeah.
moment. It can become a very special thing. Going to the gym for me became not just important, but it became a very mental, it became a place where I could center myself.
Yeah.
Nobody, I blocked everything out, turned off my phone. I had to put the thoughts outside. I also did a lot of hiking, and in
Yeah.
LA, in Los Angeles, hiking means something completely different. It means you went for a walk, and it happened to be like slightly uphill. But that I would refer to that as, I'm not a religious person, but I would say that's my church, because that's
Yeah.
when I go and I work through the crap, and I get centered. I'm also exercising. But what about self-destruction? Because you're also, a lot of people have this tendency, they might be into it for a week or two, or they might be trying to not just exercise, but
Yeah.
anything.
Whatever it is.
And there's certain people who are like, well, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve to be happy. I don't deserve to be healthy. You know, my dad, not mine, but my dad died of a heart attack at 45. So I'm going to die in my 40s. That's just who I am. It's a weird example, but I've heard it before. You know, what about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to run into people, right? I mean, as we talked about earlier, there's different personalities, and again, depending upon there's part of that is that there's DNA that we are born with. You know, I'm naturally bald. This is I you know, that's part of the genetic makeup that
Wait,
is
hold on.
making
Wait.
me.
You were born bald?
Well,
Is that what you're
no,
saying?
well, I was probably born bald, but then I got hair, and then, but you know, it's lost it from, you know, whatever that is. But then there is this, you know, but then there's our life that happens, and again, it's how we interpret that life and various different pieces in there. But there are those people that, you know, that everything could be going well in their life, and they will find something that they can complain about, or have that mental mindset. You brought it up really good, this idea that I don't deserve that. And that gets back
Mhm.
into, we talked about that centering piece at the beginning, and you talked, I love this idea of your gym as kind of your sacred area, again, using that word. But there are pieces of that. People I know that they go for that daily walk, and or it's even, you know, it's having my coffee and reading my newspaper in the morning, whatever that is that allows you to just, you know, separate from everything that else is going on around us, and being able to take a moment to do that. I mean, we are living in a high stress, chaotic, changing world that just is throwing shit at us every, you know, second of the day. And I
Mhm.
think it's really important for people to be able to step back from that. I will also go that, you know, I think there's a bit of this where there's a lot, there are people who do have psychological issues, and you should be seeing a therapist. You should be going getting help for that, because if you can't get those thoughts out of that, you're not worthy enough, or you're not, you know, there. And sometimes you can't get out of those situations on your own. You need some really professional help to do that. And I encourage anybody that's in that situation to do that. I also encourage people that if you have those people in your lives, A, try to get them help, but B, also try to limit how the toxicity that they can sometimes bring into your life. Try to limit that in your own life. We know emotions are contagious. So this idea that the emotions of one person can impact a room
Mhm.
pretty quickly, either positive or negative. And so the more that you can surround yourself with people that are going to be, you know, supportive, bringing you up as opposed to bringing you down, then that's going to be helpful for you.
Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that you should look for role models,
Mhm.
and then but be very careful about what you're looking for in those role models, especially if they're public, because there's a public persona and a private persona, and you know, don't put them up on a pedestal. But you know, you ever heard those people? It's like they're just born wired right,
Yeah.
and you look at them and you're just like, they just from the time they were a child, they're like, it's like they're born under a lucky star.
Yeah.
Remember that we
Yeah.
used to say that.
Yeah.
And but as you get older and you start to meet some of these people, or you see it and you start to dissect your own life, you realize that that's not true. You're just not seeing it, right? But what are some of the things that we should be looking for, and that are habits or are positive things in people? Like I Dwayne Johnson is
Mhm.
one person that I definitely have always looked up to. But then you start to realize, well, he's not perfect.
No.
You know, he worked hard. He got where he did. I know people who know him, and I've heard, you know, they're like, no, you don't know like how he got over this, and he did this, and he did this. And then sometimes I think he sells stuff a little bit too much, but that's my opinion. Um, I'm going to the grocery store. He's now at my grocery store. Um, but where do you go to for that, to learn things? How can you choose what's healthy and learn it as a tool without suddenly being like, oh my God, well, you know, Dwayne goes to the gym we'll use that example. Dwayne goes
Yeah.
to the gym every morning at 3 a.m. and I'm
Yeah.
not going to the gym at 3 a.m. What is wrong with
I
me
know. I
that
know.
I can't do this?
So there's a lot in that, and I want to just take a minute to kind of look. Number one is, first, it's just understand everybody's human. That we, to your point, there's personas out there, there's all those things. I went to when I was getting my PhD, one of my cohorts, one of the guys that I hung out with, and he was doing his dissertation. He was an executive coach, and he, realized he's working with these people who on the outside have everything going for them. They are the senior executive vice president making millions of dollars. They have the big, huge house and the vacation home up in the mountains, and, 2.5 kids and the trophy, spouse, whatever that would be. And they're miserable. I mean, once he starts getting past that facade, these people are miserable, and they're like, this isn't what I thought, and you're always striving for that next thing. And so understand that that outside persona that people present, particularly, as you said, public, or people in a position of power, that behind that there, and this isn't always the case. I'm not saying that every executive is like, oh my God, my life is horrid, and probably, public figures as well. But understand that they're going through struggles. Everybody goes through struggles, and that everybody has things that they want to change about themselves, or they'd like to do better, or have better things in their lives, right? That's just the natural way of humans that we live. Looking for those role models is trying to understand what are the core principles that you're looking for, not just those surface attributes. This is what we were talking with a person the other day, and they're going, you know what? I just want to be I set my mind to say, I'm going to be a billionaire. And you're going like, why a billionaire? What does that have to do with who you are, or what it is? But that was what, they were looking at, that monetary component, or they're looking at, the lifestyle that they live, and kind of go, well, what's the underlying piece that you want out of that? And then look for that, what's going to get you that. Because that, the likelihood of you getting to be a billionaire, or getting to be that, A star movie star is, yeah, you could. And I don't want to discourage people if that's a true dream of theirs, but what is it that you want from that? What are the factors that are going to want from that? And then look for people that can help you in your journey, and not just like the role model of what you want to be. And again, to your point, all right, Dwayne gets up at 3 a.m. and goes to the gym. You don't have to get up at 3 a.m. to go to the gym. You can achieve what you're trying to achieve through the way that's going to work for you, and know that that is different. So.
But I want to get up at 3 a.m.
Well, then if you want to get up, then figure out a way to do that.
He also has a gym in his backyard, so that's a little bit different.
It's always like, oh yeah, the people that, they lost all this weight after they put on weight for again, we're talking a lot about weight, I don't know why, but the actors, or the people, and they're like putting on weight for a show, and then the next movie they got to take it all off, and you're going, yeah, but they have a personal chef, and they have the gym, and they have their trainer that comes and is helping them. So which goes to the next point. We often try to do things on our own. And this idea of having somebody there to help us is actually key. And thinking about, we talked about, again, I'll use the motivation of going to the gym. If you have a gym buddy, a gym partner, and you're supposed to get there at 6 a.m. to work out with your partner, well, you're more likely to go on those cold, rainy days that you're going, oh, I just want to hit that snooze alarm one more time.
Yeah.
Right. But because somebody else is there, and you're not just letting yourself down, you would then be letting them down, you're more likely to go to the gym and do that. If you're going to eat a healthier diet, set up those dinner dates with people who want to eat healthier, and go and pick a healthy restaurant, or
That's
cook a
tough,
healthy meal.
though.
It is.
That's
it's
tough.
all tough.
Because when I went through my whole thing, I lost a lot of friends, and I don't mean that like we hate each other. It's just, I was eating healthy, and I was losing weight, and I was a very restrictive diet, and they're like, well, let's go out to the bar, let's go have a couple drinks, let's go to this new restaurant, whatever. And it's like, I can't. I'm on, and I'm not going to sit there and drink water and just watch you eat. Also, I have to get up and go to the gym, whatever. And it's an all-in thing. At least for me.
And so think about that, though. Think about what it would have been like if you would have had a friend who wanted to go on that same journey that you did.
It would have been
right?
amazing.
Yeah. So, and you bring up a really key point. So I talked about emotions are contagious, behaviors are also contagious. If you have and I'm going to get these stats wrong, so don't quote me on these stats, but there's really good research that says if you have a close friend who's overweight, you are 25% more likely to be overweight. If you have a
Mhm.
friend of a friend who's overweight, you're 5% more likely to be overweight. And again, don't quote me on those numbers, but really our behavior, we are social creatures, and the social creatures in us, we don't even realize that we're mimicking and doing things that other people around us are doing. There's a whole body of research that is just fascinating on priming, which is this underlying that things in our environment actually impact our behavior, even if they're coming at a level that we aren't really cognitive of them. Yeah, there's one of my favorite ones is this research by John Barge, who's a famous and done a lot of work on this, where they've set up this experiment, and basically person was going in to do an interview. That was the so-called experiment. But meanwhile, there was a person escorting them into the room, and for a minute they handed the person saying, "Excuse me, can you hold this for a second?" And one, it was a hot mug of hot coffee, and then in the other situation it was a cold iced drink, right? And they just held that for a little bit, and then they went in and they did their interview with this person. They came back and they asked them, what did you think of that person? So the person that was holding the mug or the iced drink was asked, what did you think of the interviewer? And when they held the warm mug, they described that person as warm, as kind, as all these positive positive words, very highly good. When it was
Mhm.
cold, they were distant, they were cold, they were all these different things. Holding a mug for 10, 20 seconds before you go into an interview should not impact how you view that person that's in this interview. And yet
Interesting.
the research shows that. And there's lots of different ones that have done. And there's some replication issues on some of this. I know some people who are in this, they say, oh, that's all that replication. But there are, that's true. But there are hundreds, if not hundreds and hundreds of studies that show that this is actually true. So
So
anyway,
so
yeah.
let me like that. I just found that really interesting because so isn't that kind of saying that if you can find your own, priming is something I'm familiar. I know some. I always joke with people. I'm like, I know a little bit about everything. It's enough to get me in trouble. So I know a little bit about priming, um, and I've tried to factor it into my own life. So what you're saying with the mug idea is if you are not in your own space, if you are not primed on your own and you're not feeling where you should be and all of that, something external is going to change you.
Yeah,
So
it
you
can.
need to be able to come into that room like I'm ready to go. I'm here, which is a priming exercise that I've come across. It's that physical. If you create the physicality with one part of your body,
Body
then it will
stances,
mental goes with it. Yeah, yeah.
people do it with music. Like, I mean, you think about the sports players who sit there with the headsets on like we do before a game, and they're listening to that same music before, it sets, you get primed by a variety of things. And so the priming researchers would say, you can't prime yourself because then what it is, and it's actually prompting. So there's two different words here, but in reality, you can help yourself if you know you're going into a situation and you want to show up in a certain way. I wear weird socks, right? So and I do this on purpose. I have Einstein socks. So on those days I want to be smart and I need to be really smart in front of clients or in front of people or whatever, I put my Einstein socks on, right?
Yeah.
And the days like I'm wearing my lucky Minnesota socks right now. I'm going on today I need to be lucky today. I don't know why, but it's like, and so you can do some of those things on your own. And again, is it going to change you from going from a grade of B to a grade of A on your test? Probably not, but it might, it just, if you do that little bit more and that little bit more, it can add up over time.
There's a book. I haven't had a chance to read it. I heard the guy on a podcast like almost a year ago, and his book like always sells out about the alter ego, and I can't remember his name right now. It's the idea of the alter ego and talisman. He actually gets into that, and it's the idea
Okay.
of like the socks. It's like
Yeah.
if you have one thing that you can hold on to, and it's almost, he actually makes an analogy to like a superhero. And he's
Mm.
like, if you want to be, it's okay to have this alter ego. And it's much the way that you see sports figures. If you're a football player, if you're a quarterback, you are a different person on the field than you are when you're hanging out with your family, because you have to have that alter ego. You have to have that level of performance when you're on the field. And I've always found that interesting. I really want to read his book. Again, just haven't had a chance. But it's that idea when I go out into the world, I'm putting on this, it's still an aspect of who you are. It's not fake. And we're going back to like Dwayne Johnson's a great example. Dwayne Johnson, when you see him in an interview or you see him, out in the world, it's almost an amplified version of who I imagine he is at home. He's still Dwayne at home hanging with his family, but you're seeing the like pumped up version out there. And it's a little bit kind of what it seems like what you're saying with your Minnesota Sox. I don't know about your team choice, but I grew up with the Seahawks.
It's actually the little Minnesota, picture of the state. But what you're talking about, this alter ego piece, there's again, we talk about this on the podcast as well as just in general. We talked about self-identity, this idea of who we are, and that, that's a strong driver of kind of our behaviors because we kind of fit in that. Self-identity is actually the way that psychologists talk about it is we have a multitude of self-schemas about how we show up in a certain contextual situation. So you just talked about Dwayne Wade, in an interview, Dwayne Wade, the basketball player,
same thing.
Dwayne Johnson,
probably,
but probably Dwayne Johnson shows up in that interview, and he has one self schema of the way that Dwayne Johnson needs to show up in that situation, and that might actually even be different if it's an interview with NBC News, or if it's an interview with some podcaster, or if it's an interview with Hollywood entertainment. So even within those interviews, you can have a different perspective of that, as you said, the alter ego that needs to show up.
Yeah.
But we all have that within our lives. You show up differently at work as much as, and you talked about this, like leave yourself at home. Well, you can't leave yourself at home, but you definitely show up and you put on a different hat, right? And whatever that hat would be. And we do that in all different parts. I act differently around my friends than my close friends versus kind of peripheral friends versus my family versus my work, people versus, at the local community, my Rotary Club that I go to. You're going to
talk to your friends differently than you talk to your grandma, but it's still part of who you are. It's still organic. It's still really you.
And people who go back and say, well, that's not who's the real you. That's all the real you.
Yeah.
Unless you're genuinely faking some things, which, some people do. They're trying to put a facade on. But even then, there's a part of you that always shows up. That part that you're actually, presenting to the world. There's a part of you that's going to be showing through in that.
Well, that's interesting because that brings us back to one of the first things we talked about is like when you get up in the morning, if you didn't sleep, if something's bothering you, that's still you. That's still you reacting. It's now the stimulus or the psychological aspect of it is just showing off a different aspect of you. If I have to go to work and I only got 2 hours sleep, it's still me, but it's definitely a different me. And you might be seeing the real core of who I am because I can't throw up the filters. I can't throw up the buffers. I can't do anything. You're going to see the angry Viking come out and it's just going to be no filters. But that's me.
but the filters are you as well, because that's the cognitive part of your brain saying, I don't want to be that, the guy that blows up at the, slightest thing. That's not really what I want to be. I want to be the person who doesn't do that. That goes, all right, let's think about this. So again, to your point, I don't even know if that's the core you. Like, what is the core you? I don't. That's a really interesting question when you start
There's a
thinking about
white
it.
paper in there somewhere. There's a full
God,
on.
no.
When I interviewed Lee, I don't know if you did you listen to the show with
I did
Lee?
not listen to that one. I saw it
About
after I listened,
halfway
and I'm going,
about
oh.
halfway through, he's like, hold on, I want to interview you. And he's literally like, he's like, wait a minute, because he's conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
You know, he's very heavy into that. And someone in my life was fell into that. And when we
Yeah.
started talking about that, he's like, and Andy was a little bit like this too. And he's like, whoa, you're collateral damage. He's
Ah,
like, you are what happens when we don't study you. We study the person. And he even stopped. He's like, I never thought about what happens to the person who deals with these people. So like the flat earthers
yeah.
that Lee talked about it. And if people haven't heard the flat earth episode, please go listen to it.
Oh God, Lee is fascinating. Just
Oh, he's
that,
awesome.
yeah.
His book is amazing. Like they sent me his book and I was reading it, the experiences at the thing.
The first chapter, just if nothing else, just read the first chapter of a
Oh,
non-flat earther going to a flat earth society or institute. I forget which one it is, that going to that convention. Oh my God.
and I asked him too. I'm like, did you please tell me you bought a t-shirt? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, I bought all this swag. He's like, I bought a model, I bought a map and everything. But I forget how we got on that. But it was it was the collateral that, like, they were looking at it and they're like, we forget that, you know, the husband of the flat earther,
Yeah.
you know, or the children, or that was the you read the book, right? So it's the story about the child.
Oh yeah.
That kills me when I read it, when it's like, how do we support our daughter who's going to school and being ridiculed because of the truths that we're teaching her? And I'm like, that's fucking child abuse.
Yeah.
That's exactly what that is.
Well,
And it just, I had to reread that passage like 2 or 3 times.
and you hear about marriages dissolving, families that can't get together for holidays, and all of these factors. To your point, that we don't think about that. We think about, you know, as we say, it's that crazy person, you know, holding up the sign in the town square, you know, saying that the earth is flat. We don't necessarily take a look at, well, what about the, you know, the brother of that person, or the, you know, the spouse, or whatever that would be. And that's yeah, fascinating.
How does somebody, as long as we're on that subject, then what's your thoughts on if somebody comes back from that? Like QAnon is a really interesting example for me. I would love, and I say this all the time, I would love, if you're listening, I would love to have a former QAnon person on the show. I want to sit down and talk to them. But if you wake up one day and it's suddenly, you know, there's people that are like, oh my God, I have been following this path that has taken me into this I was wrong. You got to rebuild. You have to rebuild your entire life, your psyche. I mean, motivations, everything is, you're back to square one. How do you deal with that? How do you start rebuilding something like that when your foundation is gone?
Yeah. Because again, that social, you've probably burned bridges with that social network that you had going into it, and then you built up this other one, which now you're burning because you realize you have that epiphany, right? It's that picture of, you know, us, and oh my God, how much do I weigh? This is crazy. I gotta, you know, do this, right? You gotta go, and then you can't hang out with those people anymore because it's contrary to what you believe. I don't know. I mean, that my first question is, I don't know how you do that. I think I might take some lessons or go and look at Alcoholics Anonymous, when, you know, in some of those kind of places, and how do they go back? Because, you know, there's probably some parallels in, you know, people like that and what they have to go through. So there's probably some resources out there that you can look and find, but I don't know. I mean, I think we started on this and saying, like, look, if you want to start to do something, you surround yourself with people that are going to be helping you, you know, get that. And you talked about how hard that is, because, you know, the friends that you have are the friends that you have. And if they're not on that same journey with you, you know, you're not going to go out, because they're going to go out and want to drink and have a big steak and drink all the, you know, and you're going, I can't do that. And so that's not going to be fun for me. It's going to be torture.
Yeah.
So why am I going to, you know, who am I going to be able to hang out with that's going to be wanting to do the things that I do? You kind of have to reform, you know, again, those social networks that we have. And it's not saying that you get rid of those people as friends, but they form a different part of your life. And now you form new friends with people maybe you meet at the gym, or, the other communities that you join. And I think the positive thing is if you can start searching for people who have had similar experiences as you, that or on the same journey that you're on, then you can support each other in that journey.
Yeah,
So
there's kind of a leap of faith in there somewhere, because there's a point where we'll stick with the weight loss idea. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to have these friends, and you start to go out into this no man's land where you have to find new ways to do things. And I think it's the same with probably the same with the QAnon people or other groups. There's got to be a trust issue there too. There's got to be, I was hoodwinked once. Why am I going to believe this? And that brings us back to what we're talking about the rewiring and figuring out what your motivations truly are. There's your motivation bridge. How do you like that segue?
Oh, nice.
If you go from
Eric.
yeah, you go from, what's my motivation of fear, conspiracy, government, whatever it is, there's the dark beliefs, but there is a motivator there. Your motivation, and it could be, correct me if I'm wrong, it happens all the time. It could be not a positive motivator, but not a dark motivator. I believe somebody may believe in, well, I think the QAnon stuff is real because I'm scared for my family.
Yeah.
You're really truly, you're afraid for your family. You love your family. You want to protect them. So you get sucked into that. Mm-hmm. It's not a healthy belief, but it comes from a place of real emotion.
We talked to Lee, and one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about that conversation was, he said, the one thing I noticed is that everybody had this moment where everybody there at this convention had some moment where trust was broken. And so to get to that point, they had this trust breaking of the ideal, to your point, and different things. And so it's not that there's so to come out of that, and he applied that to all conspiracy theories, not just flat earthers, but kind of just conspiracy theories in general, is look, they're trying to fill a need of something internally, which is very true from a psychological perspective. It's this idea of, it's not about the facts as much as they would like to state it, like, oh, we're here because of the facts. No, it's because you're something about you needs to have this community of people that are going to support you and differentiate you. Optimal differentiation is a really interesting concept too, about, we like to be different, but we also like to be within a group. It's the like when I was growing up, we would have the goths and the darks, kids, and it's like, oh, we're individual. And you go, you're all dressed exactly the same. You all are wearing the black eye. You are no different than the person. Right? No, we're individual. And you go, no, you're not. But you're part of a individualistic group.
Yeah.
And that provides you with some sense of identity in different pieces that we talk about. So
the support system too.
Yeah.
And identity. So we're sitting here, January, motivation. We're talking to all these people that are going to quit smoking. They're going to lose weight. They're going to reconcile with their family. I don't know where that came from. But all it is that, it's January, and usually, like you said, it's like people go to the gym for a week or two.
Yep.
As somebody who goes to the gym, I hate January because it's all the newbies. And it's one thing if I look at them, I'm like, okay, I give you credit. You're here, you're trying. And then there are the other people that went out and bought brand new clothes, and they're they're going to be gone in a week, and they don't know how to use the equipment. You're just like, oh my God, please go away. But how do we support these people? How do we be good friends, good community members, good,
So
what do we do?
Yeah, interesting you asked that, right? This it's not, because I thought you were going to go, so how do you make sure that you're continuing on that journey and different things? But I love the twist, right? Because it's the friend, like you said, when you went on this journey, you all of a sudden, it's like those friends that wanted to go out drinking and eating, that's not going to be there. So you have to understand, and this is where it gets hard, right? Is like that the relationship that I have with whoever this other person is may need to shift. It may need, I should be the one who is supportive of what they're trying to do. And oftentimes we don't do that. We actually ridicule, or we try to actually undermine them sometimes, because
Mhm.
that I like this relationship. I like what we're doing. I like going out on Friday nights and going to the local pub and having that big cheeseburger and a couple pints of beer. That's fun for me, and I don't want to lose that. And so if you change and you don't no longer do that, I'm losing that, and that's part of me. But if you're really a good friend or family member in different pieces, and you go, that's for the best for them, how can
Mhm.
I reimagine my relationship with them so that, all right, what is it about that Friday night that I really enjoy? Is it the conversation? Is it, the atmosphere? Is there a different, can we go to a music, venue and listen to whatever music we like, and we don't need to have the cheeseburger and the beers? Is it the conversation? So can we just go for a walk? Can we do something else that is that? What's the underlying drive? Because it's almost never that outward piece, right? That helps facilitate something else. And so understand what's that inside piece that you're trying to do, and then rework your relationship to support them in whatever they're trying to do.
Because
And
that's the
that was
emotional.
really weird picture there. But
No, 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 no. Because we connect emotions to activities.
yeah.
So using your beer and pizza burgers
Yeah.
idea, it's not that the beer's that good or the pizza's that good. It's the emotions of the friends, of the warmth, of the security, the community
Yeah.
that we connect to it. So it's not any different really than, well, it's not that I enjoy what can we use smoking. If somebody
Yeah.
smokes, they don't enjoy the actual smoking. There is a addiction part of it, but it's the, okay, well, I go out and have cigarettes with my friends when we go out drinking and partying. So it's when I go out and have one by myself, someone might say, well, it reminds me of, when we went
Yeah.
to these clubs or when I did that. And that's an emotional connection. So it's breaking those habitual things, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so what is it that you're so there's the habits, right? We haven't really talked about habits are, these almost subconscious things that we do. And there's an aspect that's called the habit loop, right? That there's a cue, that there's something happens, some trigger in the world, that then we from that cue, we drives a behavior, and from that behavior we get a reward, and that reward is most often it's internal, something I feel good, or again,
Mm-hmm.
think about, all right, it's 3 o'clock, it's time to go for my, it's 3 o'clock, that's when I smoke every day, so I'm going outside, I go smoke, I get the little, then whatever nicotine high that is, that's the reward, and thus it reinforces that at 3 o'clock the next day I'm going to go out and do that. And so
Mm-hmm.
this idea then of, all right, so what's that? You're getting some sort of reward, but can you change the behavior that then gets that reward? Or maybe you get a cue, replace that negative behavior that you have with a positive one, but then somehow, make sure that there's some sort of reward that comes with that. It might not be exactly the same, or but it could be different, but make sure there's something there. And that's going back to that social connection, that idea that there's an emotional component with our relationships. What's that emotional reward that you're getting? And it doesn't matter if it's then Friday night, all right, it's beers and burgers, or if it's Friday night and now it's, going out and playing tennis, or it's Friday night and it's doing, crossword puzzles. I don't, whatever that would be, but
Mm-hmm.
then having that component that goes with it.
How important is the physical component to that? Because it's really, it's the, you know, it's good. What is it? The rubber band thing? You like
Yeah,
snap
yeah.
the rubber band on your wrist. But
If anybody has kids, right? I mean, this is like teenage kids. This idea, I've heard this, and this isn't from my psychological background. This is from the lore of the people that have gone before me. is like get them if you ever try to sit down and have a conversation with them, they just kind of shut up, right?
Mhm.
But get them out and doing something with you, and then start that conversation, because there's movement and it's different, and I'm not just totally focused in on you and going through my head. I have to, my body's moving, whatever else is going on. And so it breaks down some of those barriers. And so from a personal perspective, there's often those are the mechanisms that allow us to get into something. So if it's, going again, maybe it's you're going out to the play golf with somebody, or different pieces, is there's something else that you don't always have to come up with something new, because you can focus in on what's going on, and you're not having to always come up with conversation or to force something. It's like, oh, nice shot, great shot,
Yeah.
and there's always that to fall back on, which is really reassuring, and we
Yeah.
we like that. So there is something about the some activity that is tied to it. There's a really interesting research on like creativity and walking, and doing different things, and all sorts of different people really highlighting that, hey, if you really want to be creative and different things, you should go out for a walk, and you should go out for a walk with somebody else, and then have those
Yeah.
conversations. But lots of different pieces around that.
One question I do have, and this might be a little parallel to what you do, but I'm curious. With COVID pandemic, the last, let's just call it 2 years that we've gone through, I mean, the effect that has on people, we don't talk about that. We dance around it. Like I
Mhm.
remember toward the beginning, there were a couple of people that said, by the way, we are going to have to deal with the psychological aspect of this at some point. And then it kind of went away.
Yeah.
And, I'll use myself as an example. I went through a divorce, right, that kind of was wrapping up right before COVID. I live alone. And I've said this before. I realized at one point, there were times I went an entire week and the only other human being I spoke to was the clerk at the grocery store.
Mm.
And I would come home, and then it hit me. There were times I went days without speaking because there was nobody around. I literally did. Because I wasn't a Zoomer. My family doesn't really Zoom. I didn't have, I lived alone. I'm like, I literally did not utter words for days at a time. And I mean, motivationally, behaviorally, that's got to
Ah,
mess with people. It's just, we're not wired to deal with that kind of thing
n-
as a
n-
society, especially Americans.
well, as humans, we're social creatures, right? We
Mhm.
long, as much as we, and this is an American thing, right? This image of that lone cowboy out there on the range all alone, and
Mhm.
that's kind of who we are. We're this tough individualistic piece. But at night, they would gather around the campfire with all the other cowboys,
They
and
sang
they sang
songs.
songs. This is not yeah, you can have that piece, but we are definitely communal people. We want to have those strong relationship bonds. And with the pandemic, so those people that, as you kind of get that shut in, and even just human touch, right? I mean, so you talk about
Mhm.
talking, right? And just maybe talking with the clerk at the grocery store. Well, but I mean, when was the last time you had a hug, or when you did other
Just
pieces?
shook
And
someone. We don't even shake hands
yeah,
anymore.
exactly.
It's all,
So oh yeah, I mean, all of
everybody's
that.
fist bumping. It's like, no, I want,
Yeah,
I want, I want, I want to
yeah.
feel another human being.
Yeah, and there's that part, and you're absolutely right that it has to do a big thing. There's a whole bunch of research about the stress levels within the United States, probably within the world, but I know the ones in the United States. And from an organizational perspective, when we talk to companies about some of this stuff, is going, look, people hide it. They hide it actually pretty well, but below the surface, that stress is at a highest level it's ever been at, in at least 1 in 3 people, if not higher than that for many people. So the pandemic is really causing, and the other thing about the pandemic that is really hard for people from a psychology perspective is it's unknown and it's changing. And then, we talked about progress before and how, I don't know if you remember, like right around this time last year when, the vaccines were coming out, and it's like, oh, we're finally coming out of this. This is great.
Yeah.
And you just had that
Turning the corner.
there was almost that euphoric, like, weight off of your back feeling. And then Delta hit, and all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, it's like two steps forward, four steps back. And
Yeah.
that makes another big thing now with Omicron and everything else, that you're just like, and then there's a part where is a factor called cognitive overload, where if too much information, too much of this stuff is coming at us, we shut down. Our brain shuts down, and we basically go back to falling on heuristics, those rules of thumbs that we do, or just kind of the habits that we've already established, and we just kind of shelter, and that's not good for anybody.
That happened after 9/11. Remember that? Because we were all, I find that there's a lot of parallels between COVID and 9/11 as far as human behavior. I see, although with the pandemic, it's been exponentially larger. But remember, after 9/11, we were all glued to our TVs and our radios, for those who remember radio, for a week.
Yeah.
And then I remember people just finally checking out, and they're like, I can't do this anymore. And then I remember there was 9 months later, there were a lot of children born. There were a lot, so we go to these base human activities. Remember the beginning of the pandemic? It was like suddenly day drinking was a sport, and we were proud of it,
Fritz, the difference with 9/11 and the pandemic is that 9/11 brought everybody together, right? It was this whole piece that it didn't matter what side of the political aisle you were on. It didn't matter, well, outside of maybe some religion and some people, the whole Islamophobia that happened after that. But for the most part, it brought communities together. And the thing about the pandemic is that it's kept us apart.
Fractured.
And like, you can't go. And I remember so I've been in a Rotary Club for 20 plus years, and I remember going to the meeting after that, and we had a 100-person club, and I mean, it was just this coming together to support each other, to feel sorry for the people that have died, but it was a catharsis. It was this element that it was a communal gathering. Well, when the pandemic happened, we didn't meet. We ended up going on Zoom, and so we got to see each other on a Zoom call, but it's a very different experience than we had with 9/11. So
I heard an interesting interview recently with a reporter who's American. I want to say he was American. He was definitely not Russian, but he had lived in Russia and worked for a long time. And he made an interesting observation where he was talking about 9/11, and he's like, it was a horrible thing that happened. It was a tragedy. But in other countries, and he was in Russia, he's like, terrorist attacks and horrible things happen more frequently. So they're still bad, but they take them in a different stride because they're used to them to a certain degree. And Americans, it feels sometimes like we don't have that history. So yes, 9/11, horrible event. Thousands of people died, changed the fabric of our country. But if you're in Russia, you have Chechnyan rebels that are having terrorist attacks, and you're having all of these other things. There's a different way to approach it. So, and plus we're a younger country. There's some interesting discussions in there somewhere. I don't know if today's the day to have them, but we definitely have an American way of dealing with the world. And then now you have this, like you mentioned, this fractured political, this fractured factual. We don't even know, do masks work? Do masks not work? Does Omicron do this? Does COVID do this? There was a study that came out yesterday that they put the wrong flu vaccine out. I don't know if you saw that. it not the wrong flu vaccine, but basically it happens every couple of years. Is they have to figure out
guess.
which flu,
Yeah.
and apparently they made the wrong guess this year.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I got a flu vaccine the other day, and I just found out basically it was useless. So
Likelihood, it's
you know,
it really is interesting when we think about the way that we respond in these types of situations, and the idea that there's a right way versus a wrong way, I think is probably not there. But there is this piece that you talked about, this idea that we're fractured in how we approach it, and we're fractured in even the idea of what is the truth or what is going on. And I I complain about this on our show every once in a while, but also just in general, is that I think we have done a really disservice to Americans about the teaching of science and how science. So this idea that, well, they said masks didn't work, and then they said they work, and then there's other things, and it's like that's how science works. It's like you get more information, and now with that further information, it brings up other questions, and so now you ask those questions, and that might whole change. We talked about gravity at the earlier in this conversation, right? And you said, "Oh, gravity is this true thing," and you're going, "Yeah, but for gravity for many years was thought of as in one way. Then Einstein came around and changed this idea of actually even how gravity worked." And so there's always this re-examination of things in science, and I think it's really our education system has not done us a good service to say that's how it works. And so, yet you shouldn't expect the answers at the beginning. And it's hard for us because we crave certainty. We crave, like, just give me the answers, because then I can compartmentalize that, and then I can move on. But when I can't, then it's there, and that creates that angst that we don't like. So
it's that cognitive thinking that Andy Norman brings up. So there's the whole idea behind that. So I'm going to start wrapping this up, but I definitely have one more question. So I'm going to call this the life preserver question.
Okay.
I'm gonna call it that. So if you just had an elevator, you're in an elevator with somebody, and they come to you and they're like, I'm having all these issues. Help me, help. Give me a nugget. Give me a life preserver kind of idea that somebody can grab onto and go, okay, I like that. I can formulate something around that. I can kind of hold on to that and build on it. Some sort of concept, some sort of.
All right,
I've climbed the mountain, and I have. You're sitting there meditating. Answer me this riddle me this, Batman. What's the answer to everything?
I want to have you turn around and look at the pillow that you have right next to you. Things could be. Yeah, I'm primed to go there. This idea that things could be worse. Come on, go to life. Hey, you could be living in Russia, and they have terrorist attacks every 2 months.
It's true. It's a good point.
But and I'm facetiously saying that, but I think there is a component of, so that elevator pitch, things are going bad, as you kind of go. And this is different, I think, if it's going to be a younger person versus somebody who's, in their mid to 20s or beyond, where you kind of look and go, how horrible it is today, but you look back, you've had bad days in the past, and you've come through that for them. And again, there are people who have significantly massive issues and traumas that they need to get over, and their life is purely hell, but go see a therapist for that. If it's just you're having a really crappy day and you're just pissed off at the world, and you kind of go, you know what, you've had these days before, and you've come out of them pretty good. And if you take this as a perspective of a learning experience of living in this moment, we have this concept that my co-host and I talk about finding your groove, right? This idea, of being, like, getting into that moment of what this is. And if you can just examine what's going on in your life as objectively as possible, which is hard. I'm not saying any of this is easy. And going, all right, so what can I take from this? What do I need to do to get out of this? And then what can I learn from this moving forward? And again, it's probably the piss poor, somebody's going, that's a little, life preserver that isn't going to float my pinky up here. But, hey, at least, I think there's something about mindsets and how you approaching your life. And, as the Stoics say, you can't control the events around you, but you can control how you respond to those. And I think that's a thing that, if we all kind of looked at that, you're going, I can't control, the pandemic. I can control my own actions and how I respond to things. And that's all I can do.
No, I think it's beautiful. There's it reminds me of the Eddie Murphy routine where it's like, if you're starving and somebody gives you a cracker, you're like, oh my God, is that a Ritz cracker? Is that, it's like, if you're out there just trying to survive, like that little piece of advice is going to be enough to grab onto. It's going to feel like a huge dinner.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So,
which is a relative piece. And the thing that humans are not necessarily good at is, so this is going back to what you just said about Russia and the United States and how we interpreted things. It's like, we hadn't had that type of experience before 9/11. And so for us, it was relative, and wow, we blow it out of shape. But we also deal with 30 to 50,000 people dying in car accidents every year, right? And that doesn't change the ethos of the world or of the United States. It's what we're accustomed to. And so, oftentimes I think when we get in those funks, it's because we're thrown out of what we're accustomed to. But that doesn't mean that was a bad thing or a good thing. It goes back to, how do you interpret that snake, and what is it how are you going to interpret this, and then how do you move forward from there? So
comfort zones can be good and bad. They can be very good and very bad. So
I like a comfort zone on a cold winter night, in front of a fire. There you go.
That sounds nice. So where can people find you? You have a whole array you have an empire that you've built pretty much. Where do they start if they want to learn more?
So if behavioral science of any of this stuff is of any interest, that you can listen to the podcast that we do. And again, we interview cool people like Lee and Andy, as well as other researchers, talk about the behavioral science piece, the human side of things, like why are people deciding to follow a conspiracy theory and different pieces of that, and how do you apply that to your work and life? And so that's called Behavioral Grooves. It's out on anyone there. Or if I'm out on Twitter, and so you can, at What Motivates is my Twitter handle, and so you can look me up there and DM me, and then that's.
Are you on the Instagram? Are you on the?
Actually, I'm not. My company is, and
really,
actually, my company is the Lantern Group, but we're out under Instagram on 100 behaviors, because again, we're talking about behavioral science piece and doing some cartoons and some fun stuff there. That's kind of cool.
I like Instagram because it's less of a screaming match, and it's a lot of pretty pictures and fun videos. It is.
It's really nice. It's like
it's very therapeutic. It's very. Oh, Kurt, thank you so much. I feel like I owe you for a therapy session, so I'll send you my copay information, and you can bill Blue Cross, and we'll see if they actually put it through.
Yeah, in 3 years, I might get 10 cents. So there you
go. But I appreciate it. We'll put all the information in the show notes, and I really appreciate you spending time with me. And this is really informative. That's why I do the show, so it gives me a chance to work out my own demons.
This is why we do. I mean, it's the same with us. I mean, we it's like, this is fascinating to us. So if nobody listens, it's like, I don't know. All right, I care, but I still had, I got to talk to these really cool people and learn these really cool things. So, thank you. This is always fun. I just am always excited to talk to people about this stuff, and hopefully somebody took something out of this. And if that is the case, that's great.
Yeah, you touch one person. So.
Yep.
Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed the show. Help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review. If you want to support us even more, you can find a link to our Patreon account in the show notes. And if you're one of our diehard fans, head on over to the VikingDogStore.com, where you can find official Open Highway merchandise to show your support to the entire world. But most of all, thanks for listening.
for the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.
Copyright Viking Dog 2022. All rights reserved.